Hi everybody, this is Gail, and I'm making a new recording, a new video for week 4 of HCA 650, or for the older number, it's HCA 699. You guys are now in week 4, meaning you're almost halfway there. And I know this is a really intense course. I feel bad. There's no way to make it easy, but I want you to learn stuff, and that's why I'm kind of holding your feet to the fire a bit here. So it will get better. If you're having problems formatting papers and that's still costing you points, you can always call me and I will go over things with you. And I really encourage downloading those apps like Grammarly, certainly Perla, and I can show you how to add that to your Word. It doesn't work so well if you just have, it doesn't work at all if you have Word through the GCU. But if you have a separate Word that you just bought as the student one, which is it's much less costlier, you can do add-ons with it. But Grammarly will work with any of it. So let me know if you're still having issues with that, because I don't want you to be losing points on that. The next thing that I want to do is go over this week's paper. So this week's paper, as you know, we're building a project. It's hypothetical because you don't have time in 8 weeks to do this, to actually implement this project. But as you do each of these papers, you're of course building the final paper, which will be all put together. The only thing that you'll take out is the intro and conclusion for each paper, so that just for the final paper, you only have one intro and one conclusion. So this is another section of the paper, and it's called the proposed solution. So your proposed solution is whatever you're doing to help solve the problem. The problem you identified in section 8, section A, your first paper. Okay, you identified the problem, and then you have some type of intervention or solution to that problem. And so this is the paper that's actually going to provide the evidence for that solution. And again, it's evidence-based, so your paper should be heavily cited. You're not coming up with this solution on your own. You found it in the research. You're going to cite that, and then that's what you're implementing. So the first one is to describe the proposed solution. And so you're going to describe whatever your intervention is that you're doing for your problem. Okay. It also talks about then describe the proposed solution for the gap identified and the ways in which it is consistent with current evidence. Now, they didn't have you work too much on gap. And so I'm going to show you an example of gap. Gap is where when you look at that one research article that you're using to base your project on, within that research article, there's going to be somewhere where those researchers at the end, when they got done with their research, they identified a gap where further research you should probably do this. We wish that maybe we would have added this, but at the tail end was when we identified that that was a gap in our research, and so further research can be done on this. That's your gap. So you want to go back to your original research article that you're using, that you're basing your project on. I know there's a lot. There's collateral evidence around that, but that basic one that you're using for your evidence-based project, okay? So I'm going to show you what one of those gaps looks like. I'm going to go in. I had to do this for one of my classes just recently. We had to do a gap analysis and then write a research thing, just like you guys are doing. So in a research study, I'll go up to the top here. This is premature, untimely, and traumatic death of family members and mental health disorders among inpatient substance users. This is actually a descriptive study, meaning that they didn't do an intervention other than administering a survey, okay? And through that survey, then they found out information about these families that had a premature, untimely death, traumatic death within them that was related to likely substance use. So they surveyed these family members or the substance user to find out more about that and whether they also had co-occurring mental illness with that. So as I went through my study to find out what the gap was, I went way, way down to the bottom, okay? And in the bottom, you have results, okay? Go past that. And then discussion. And then finally, in your Clinical implications is good too. We'll work on that in a minute. But limitations in future research. So if you go to that in your research journal article, and all of them should have it, you're going to be able to see the gaps. So for instance, in this one it says, however, since we did obtain results that have statistical significance from this sample, we feel that future researchers may want to consider replicating this study with a larger sample. So in your project that you are hypothetically doing, are you doing that, or how are you expanding on that gap that they've identified in that original research article that you're using? Are you using a larger sample? And if not, then that might be something that you can consider adding at this point. Looking at what their N is. N is the participant number, and then that you're using a larger sample, and that's how you're helping to fill that gap. The other thing is, in this one, the self-report instrument or the survey did not allow for the researchers to get the information themselves. It was like a paper survey. Sometimes in research studies, you actually train people to interview these people. So they are the ones actually filling out the answers, and they may ask additional questions, clarifying questions. But in this, they just had a survey so people could skip questions if they wanted to. Maybe they didn't understand the question. Maybe the language in it they didn't understand. The words were not at their reading level or something. And so with an interviewer actually being there, you can work through some of that, but with a paper instrument, you cannot. Also, future studies should be designed to gather information from earlier generations if possible. So this study actually looked like at grandparents and great-grandparents of the people who actually, let's see, I have to remember back to the study, the people who actually, let me think and get my thoughts straight. Whoever actually, sorry, people waving at me. I'm in my office. They're waving at me in the window. Further distraction. So people that actually were the ones that had the untimely death, it was like a grandfather or great-grandfather, grandmother, great-grandmother. Maybe they were in a car accident, or they died of an overdose, or they died of suicide, something like that. And thus we're studying now this current generation that is here in front of us, and what effects that has had on them. Did it lead them to substance abuse, and did it lead them possibly to having some type of mental health disorder? Okay, so they're saying that maybe we need to look at earlier generations. That'd be really far back there. So looking more at a generational trauma. Okay. Then you can read through, you can find many other gaps, but then they say there's also limitations to generalizability related to their lack of racial diversity. So this might be something too, if your article says something like this, that maybe they only had a really exclusively white or a certain age group, or all exclusively Hispanic or something like that. And then they're looking for, hey, we should have looked at something more racially diverse. So for example, in my paper I did, I wanted to look at the Native American population. So I was helping to fill that gap, as well as looking at a larger sample size. Okay, so that would be how you would kind of address those gaps. And strangely, in this article, I found up here, kind of out of place, but I found some more gaps up in here. I'm going through her quickly. Hope I don't cause anybody seizures here. So study rationale, and here there were some gaps too. So below it was saying there were gaps in their own study that they just did. Up here in study rationale, they had identified gaps when they did their literature search, before they actually did their research study. They had identified the gaps. It said, one limitation of earlier studies of premature, untimely, and traumatic death is that they focused on individuals with opiate or cocaine addiction only. In addition, they failed to examine the potential impact of the PUT, premature, untimely deaths, of other family members other than parents or individuals. So in this study, they of course filled that gap by looking at grandparents and great-grandparents. They filled the gap of their lit review that they noted on that they just studied cocaine deaths and opiate deaths. And in this study, they looked at all kinds of traumatic, untimely, premature deaths. So in your in your lit in your lit review that you did, you will find other gaps as well that you may want to fill in with your study. And then in your actual research study that you're basing this on, you will want to also look at gaps. So that's what you're going to address. Sorry, that was kind of convoluted, but that's what you're going to want to then address with this part when it's saying describe the proposed solution. So I would put a header for that, describe the proposed solution, heavily cited in a paragraph or two describing your solution, why that solution or that intervention is based on evidence by more than once. You have your main article that you are basing it on, but then you have your collateral information too. Who else tried this solution and how is it based on evidence, okay? Then you're going to go into organizational community culture. And this sounds a little similar to some of the other things you may have addressed in other papers, and especially stakeholders. I know you've addressed that before. But in organizational community culture, another heading, I want you to talk about wherever you're going to do your project at, and likely it's a place that you work at, right? How is it that this fits with your mission of your facility? Or with the community culture of that facility? Maybe it's a church-based organization, for example, a nonprofit. They do a lot of these types of things. They're very much into patient safety and quality of care, whatever it is. And then also the community around it, you can go into that. This county or this city, they have a huge problem with this. And the city is already devoting money, grants, education to, I guess, to work on this problem. And so this is just another intervention that it sounds like the community and the facility culture would be very supportive of. So you want to add all that information, and you can cite that too. If you have your mission statement from that facility, you can peel out words or phrases from it, paraphrase it rather than quote, and cite it. If you can go into your county health or your city information, any of that, go into news stories of what they're doing to address this problem in the local area, and you can cite that. Next is stakeholders. So stakeholders is another header. Sorry, I'm just wild about headers, but it helps me grade your papers, and it helps the reader find where this stuff is. And when you have a really long paper like you're going to have at the end, it's really much easier to read. And just like in that research article we just went through, there's headers in it. And that's how I found directly what I wanted to find in that article without having to read every word and just giving up. So stakeholders, these are the stakeholders that are actually going to be, they're going to be affected by your solution, which is your intervention. So just think completely outside the box and inside the box, anybody that this touches. And I use the example of when I used to do education and I would come up with a new policy or a new project. I would think that I had notified everybody and emailed everybody or thought of everybody to invite to the planning meetings or the information meetings. And I always missed somebody or maybe two somebodies. And I'd have angry people showing up in my office or nasty grams in my email saying, hey, this is really going to affect me. And did you know this? And you didn't invite me. And why aren't you thinking of me? And like, it was just, so I would have to sit there and I'd ask a few other people, who am I forgetting? And at the end of the email, I'd say, if I have forgotten anyone, be sure to CC them on this. You have to really think about who all it's going to affect in that facility, in the community, in the city. And don't forget anybody, okay? So you don't have to cite this area because this is you brainstorming about who it would affect and who you need to inform. Those are the stakeholders. Expected outcomes and goals. So I want to go back to this article. So you will have your own outcomes that you've identified, which are your objectives. Objectives are those things: to do this, to do that, to do that, okay? They're two statements. And then you have a goal at the top. So in this article, they also identified a goal. I'm going to give you seizures here again by running through this till I find it. So under study rationale, in yellow here, the goals of the current study were to address these gaps and determine the prevalence of premature and untimely death experiences among the families of individuals receiving treatment in a residential substance use disorder facility. Okay, so that's the goal. And then they go through some objectives to explore the possibility of intergenerational transmission of dysfunction associated with premature untimely deaths, to examine the impact that these losses among their families had on the psychopathology of these individuals. So you can do just one goal, or you can have a couple of goals, whatever you feel like is appropriate for your project, okay? And then underneath goals, you have the objectives. So your goal is the overlapping big umbrella, okay? This is what I am going to achieve. Your objectives are how you're going to do it. So I'm going to, actually, your objectives are more details on your goal. So to explore the possibility of this, to educate on this, to increase patient safety on this, to increase staff efficiency, to increase staff satisfaction, whatever. It runs the gamut depending on what your project is, okay? So that's what I would like you to do, and you can do it in an outline form if it helps you to organize your thoughts and make it more concise. And this is not cited here because this is all your ideas, okay? Then the next section of the paper is your method to achieve the outcomes. So you have big umbrella statement, the goal. This is what I want to do. Objectives is because this is the goal I want to do, and because I'm going to increase patient safety, to increase staff. Sorry, I'm losing my brain today. To increase patient safety, to increase staff satisfaction, blah, blah. So underneath those objectives, then you have interventions, okay? Those are how you're going to accomplish those. So if I'm going to increase patient safety, let me start over. A big goal, to decrease falls in an acute care orthopedic post-operative unit. My objectives are to increase patient safety, to decrease falls, to increase staff education, to do all these. Then my interventions for each of those I would list under each objective. How am I going to increase patient education? How am I going to increase staff satisfaction? So you'll put in an outline form under those exactly how you're going to do it. And those don't need to be cited either. This is part of your project. That's your ideas, okay? Then let's go back, and the impact of the outcome. So describe the impact the outcomes will have on one or all of the following indicators. So quality of care. And I tell everybody, when you do a project in healthcare, when you're doing anything in healthcare, you're almost always patient-centered. Everything you do is patient-centered. So even if it's something having to do with the staff, you're increasing staff satisfaction or turnover or anything like that, it still comes down to you're affecting the patient, right? The patient and their families is what we work for. So when you're talking about the impact of things, you're going to then do a paragraph with the header impact of outcomes and talk about that. How is it affecting quality of care? How is it going to affect patient-centered quality, efficiency of workflow, environmental changes, whatever it is that's affecting? Talk about the impact of that. And these don't need to be cited either. This is part of your project and part of your ideas, okay? And if you have even more problems trying to think about that, think about in court when you have a victim impact statement, right? Somebody, this is terrible. I'm not going to do murder. Let's say somebody broke into my car and stole everything out of there and vandalized it. It was a brand new car I'd saved up for years for. So I go up to do my victim impact statement. I'm going, this was terrible. I used all my money on this. I paid cash. I saved up for years. I need this for transportation to work, to take my kids to daycare. Hold on a second. My lights just turned out. Okay. Sorry, they're on emotion control. Sorry. Only when I'm doing videos. Okay, so think about that. It's the impact. What impact does it have on me, that victim? But think about the impact then of the outcomes you've identified. What impact does that have on the patient, on the families, on the facility? And really, they should be all positive impacts for the most part. I mean, there might be some questionable, maybe it's going to cause some chaos for a little bit while they're learning this new thing, or a little bit of stress or something like that. And you can add those because that's a true thing. Okay. So that is your paper. I hope I explained it okay, and I wish you guys the best of luck. I will be posting an example of it, mostly for how it's organized, how the paper is set up. Not so much, as to what the person wrote, because I can't say that there's ever been like a perfect paper. I'm still looking for it. So I want you to be the perfect paper to address all of these perfectly. And maybe I'll use your paper as an example. I've already done this week, because I found somebody who did an excellent paper and it answered all of these perfectly. So go for it, and good luck to you. And if you have any questions, please call me. Thank you.